pull you by your feet and drag
I
you, come
wonder
close.
what was his last words.
That
Ah,
nigga, they saying that ain't they problem. They smoking for too.
Brand nigga, what you saying? Nigga slap his bitch ass right in his mouth. Nigga, I can catch me a beat with a towel. One wrong move, nigga ain't get smacked. Nigga ain't come around me trying to get him a feet in his dumb ass. I got jacked. Nigga, we having bros that Gary Payton, bro having bros that.
This is 20-year-old Jacorin Hall, known as Rundown 4, a Dallas drill rapper who was shot and killed not long after releasing a diss track for his op.
Hello, my food. I still want my. Oh, he is getting shot at. Ooh!
On the evening of November 21st, 2025, gunfire erupted in the 800 block of North Lancaster Avenue in Dallas, Texas. When officers arrived, they found Jacorin lying in the roadway with multiple gunshot wounds. Paramedics attempted life-saving measures on the pavement, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. Less than an hour earlier, he had been on TikTok Live, flashing his chain, talking confidently to viewers, and referencing ongoing rivalries in real time. The stream ended like any other. No panic, no warning. But behind the scenes, tensions tied to long-standing Dallas drill conflicts were already boiling over. By the time the shots rang out, what had started as online disrespect had spilled into the street. And almost immediately after his death, diss tracks began circulating, turning the night into another chapter and a cycle that had already claimed multiple lives.
This would say Dallas police investigate fatal shooting on Lancaster Avenue. It says a man was found dead from apparent gunshot wounds after Dallas police responded to a shooting on November the 21st, 2025 in the 800 block of North Lancaster Avenue. The incident occurred around 6:30 p.m. and the victim was pronounced dead at the scene by Dallas Fire Rescue. The investigation is ongoing and is documented under a case number, and according to a press release from the Dallas Police Department, authorities are urging anyone with information about the case to contact the detectives.
To understand how a live stream turned into a homicide scene in under an hour, we have to go back to the alliances, the feuds, and the decisions that built up to that moment. This is the life and death of Jacorin Rundown 4. Jacorin Hall was born in 2005. He grew up in the Lancaster area of Dallas, Texas, a part of the city where music, neighborhood loyalty, and street politics often overlapped. He would later become known by his rap name, Rundown 4, a name that carried weight in a growing local movement called Dallas Drill. But before the stage name and before the online attention, he was simply a teenager from Lancaster trying to build an identity in a city that demanded one quickly. And it was in that search for identity that music first became more than just background noise. As a teenager, Jacorin gravitated toward drill rap, a subgenre known for its aggressive tone and direct references to real-life events. Unlike mainstream rap that often blurs fiction and storytelling, drill tends to be specific. Names, neighborhoods, and incidents are rarely hidden. For young men growing up in high-tension areas, drill music becomes both an outlet and a declaration. Jacorin embraced that culture early, aligning himself with PCE, short for Problem Child Entertainment, a Lancaster-based clique with ties to other neighborhood groups. But PCE was not just a music collective, it was part of a network of alliances. PCE had connections with Savage Gang and 300, and for years maintained working ties with 5K, ATM, and OTG. Those relationships were reportedly strengthened by a figure named Jizzle, who was affiliated with OTG and had strong ties to ATM. Jizzle was seen as a bridge between crews, someone trusted across lines that were otherwise tense. That bridge allowed PCE to move between alliances without immediate conflict. However, the stability of those alliances would not last, and everything changed on January 11, 2022. On that day, Jizzle and 3 other men allegedly attempted a robbery during a transaction. The situation escalated quickly. Gunfire was exchanged, and in the chaos, Jizzle was struck.
And it says Rundown 4 got shot after trying to rob the wrong person. They dragged his body into the middle of the street. His condition is still unknown, but the streets are already saying he didn't make it, man. And this will be the post that would say that he was shot after an attempted robbery. His body was dragged into the street. people would be dissing immediately. This would be 1D Glock. You would say put his ass in the air then.
Reports indicate that he was hit both by the intended target and by one of his own associates. He died as a result of those gunshot wounds. His death was not just a personal loss for those close to him, it was a turning point for the alliances tied to Jizzle. And for Jacorin, that loss shifted something permanently. After January 11th, 2022, those who followed Rundown 4's music noticed a change. His lyrics became more direct, less restrained. He referenced enemies openly. He spoke on real events. He no longer avoided naming rivals in coded language. The tone hardened, and that shift reflected the fractures forming between groups. Following Jizzle's death, PCE strengthened its presence alongside ATM, 5K, and OTG, often posting up in their shared territory known as the Hills. On the surface, it appeared unified, but underneath that unity, tension was growing. According to statements Rundown 4 later made during interviews and social media lives, problems escalated when members of PCE allegedly became involved with the sisters and girlfriends of 5K members. Personal relationships began to affect street politics, and what might have remained manageable became personal. And once it became personal, the dissing began. Rundown 4 claimed that members of 5K started mocking Jizzle's death even though he had been tied to OTG. OTG reportedly chose to remain neutral and refused to escalate the situation. That neutrality did not resolve tensions. Instead, it deepens divisions. In response, PCE began dissing K-Man, a 5K member who had been shot and killed at a gas station on May 31, 2022. Music became the weapon of choice, and lyrics carried messages that were impossible to misunderstand. Meanwhile, another alliance was forming across town. PCE's relationship with Savage Gang grew stronger as Savage Gang itself had fallen out with 5K. Shared enemies often create new partnerships, and that is what appeared to happen. Members from PCE and Savage Gang began spending more time together, posting up in the southern parts of Dallas and referencing each other in music. For Jacorin, this period solidified his position in the drill scene. He released tracks that leaned into this rising tension. One of his most recognized songs, Head Toppers, addressed those dissing his deceased associate, Jizzle. The track contained references to violence and retaliation, and it quickly gained traction in Dallas drill circles. The song established his brand, fearless, direct, and unapologetic. But his career was not just about dissing, it was about recognition. Rundown 4 began appearing on TikTok lives frequently, showcasing his chains, grills, and lifestyle. He engaged directly with viewers and sometimes addressed rivals in real time. His presence online made him more visible, and visibility in drill culture often carries both influence and risk. And then another death reshaped the narrative again. On July 4th, 2023, Tavarius Robinson, known as TG, was killed after reportedly being lured to what he believed was a party. 2 days later, on July 6th, 2023, Dallas police responded to the 1300 block of South Fitzhugh Avenue, where they found the 20-year-old shot in an alley. He was pronounced dead at the scene.
This would say Dallas police investigate fatal shooting on Lancaster Avenue. It says a man was found dead from apparent gunshot wounds after Dallas police responded to a shooting on November the 21st, 2025 in the 800 block of North Lancaster Avenue. The incident occurred around 6:30 p.m. and the victim was pronounced dead at the scene by Dallas Fire Rescue.
It did not treat it as tragedy, it treated it as leverage. In Dallas drill culture, that type of direct response cemented his reputation. It was clear that he was not distancing himself from street politics, he was embedding himself in them. And that decision would shape the direction of his career. By 2024 and into 2025, Rundown 4 was considered one of the recognizable voices in Lancaster's drill scene. He had established ties with Dallas drill records artists and continued referencing ongoing tensions in his music. In interviews, he spoke about courthouse altercations with rival rappers. He described confrontations that had been recorded and posted online. He did not avoid the narrative, he leaned into it. But leaning into conflict carries consequences. As diss tracks continued to circulate between crews, the cycle intensified. Every new death became a reference in the next song. Every insult demanded a response. The alliances that once formed around Jizzle had fractured completely. The drill scene in Dallas was no longer just music. It was an ongoing conversation shaped by real losses. Rundown 4's tracks were played on repeat in neighborhoods tied to his clique. His lyrics were dissected on Reddit threads and Instagram pages. His online lives drew viewers who both supported and criticized him. He built a following that understood the context behind each bar. However, the deeper he moved into that narrative, the more exposed he became. Warnings allegedly surfaced online from individuals claiming he was around people who could not be trusted. There were mentions of connections through incarcerated relatives. Some said he was moving too freely despite active tensions, but he continued posting, continued performing, continued addressing rivals in real time. On November 21st, 2025, everything changed. That afternoon, Jacorin Hall had been active on social media. Around 5:25 p.m., he was on TikTok Live, chain visible, grills flashing, interacting casually with viewers. Nothing in his tone suggested urgency. Nothing hinted at what would unfold less than an hour later. The stream ended like any other. But shortly after 6:30 p.m., gunfire erupted in the 800 block of North Lancaster Avenue in Dallas, Texas. Witnesses later described hearing multiple shots in quick succession. Some stepped outside cautiously, others immediately called 911. The evening traffic slowed as confusion spread along the block. Within minutes, Dallas police units were dispatched to the scene. And when officers arrived, they encountered a chaotic and rapidly unfolding situation. Jacorin was found lying in the roadway with visible gunshot wounds. Officers secured the immediate perimeter, scanning for potential suspects and ensuring there was no continued threat in the area. Patrol units fanned out while others focused on rendering aid. Moments later, Dallas Fire Rescue arrived. Paramedics moved in quickly, assessing his condition. They began life-saving measures on the pavement where he had fallen. Medical equipment was deployed. Compressions were initiated. Efforts were made to stabilize him on site before transport. But despite those attempts, his injuries were catastrophic. After exhaustive efforts at the scene, he was pronounced deceased. And as emergency lights continued flashing against storefront windows and parked cars, yellow crime scene tape stretched across North Lancaster Avenue, sealing off the block that had just transformed from a normal Friday evening into a homicide investigation. But the timeline of that night didn't begin and end with a single moment. Earlier that same evening, Dallas police had responded to another fatal shooting in a Lancaster corridor. Around 6:30 p.m., officers were dispatched to the 800 block of North Lancaster Avenue regarding reports of gunfire. At that scene, they located another individual who had also suffered fatal injuries. Investigators worked to determine whether the two incidents were connected, canvassing the area for witnesses and reviewing nearby surveillance footage. As detectives began documenting shell casings, photographing evidence markers, and interviewing residents, word of Jacorin's death began circulating online. And that's when the digital response accelerated. Within minutes, screen recordings of his 5:25 p.m. TikTok Live resurfaced. Viewers noted the timestamp. The proximity between that live appearance and the shooting became a focal point of discussion. Posts spread rapidly across Instagram, Reddit, and local drill blogs. But then another layer was added. Less than an hour after news of the shooting began spreading, a diss track surfaced online referencing his death. The timing shocked even those familiar with the pace of online retaliation. The song used a beat associated with his earlier music, and lyrics alluded to the events of that evening. And that rapid reaction intensified an already volatile atmosphere. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, investigators continued methodically processing evidence. Detectives combed through the immediate area for security cameras. Businesses along Lancaster were contacted. Doorbell footage from nearby homes was requested. Officers spoke with individuals who had been in the vicinity at the time of the shooting. Traffic was redirected. Media units began arriving. Onlookers gathered at the edge of the police cape, some filming, some arguing with officers as emotions ran high. But as law enforcement focused on facts, speculation filled the void. Online narratives quickly diverged. Some claimed it was a robbery. Others alleged it was retaliation tied to long-standing conflicts involving PCE, Savage Gang, 5K, and OTG. None of those claims were confirmed by Dallas police at the time. Officially, the department stated that the investigation remained ongoing and that no arrests had been made. And that absence of immediate answers only fueled more commentary. Clips from his earlier diss tracks were reposted, particularly "Where the F is TG?" Lines once aimed at rivals were now circulated in reverse, quoted in comment sections as if the lyrics had foreshadowed his own fate. Opponents mocked him publicly. Live streams went active dissecting alliances and rivalries. His nickname, Coco, was referenced repeatedly in posts meant to taunt. But while the internet moved quickly, the investigation required patience. Detectives began reconstructing the sequence of events leading up to the shooting. Phone records would be examined, associations would be mapped. Individuals seen with him earlier in the day would likely be questioned. Whether the motive involved robbery, betrayal, or retaliation had yet to be officially determined. And as that work unfolded quietly behind the scenes, the broader implications became harder to ignore. Jacorin Hall, known publicly as Rundown 4, had built much of his reputation within Dallas drill culture through direct, unfiltered responses to street conflict. His music often addressed real incidents, real losses, real rivalries. After the deaths of figures like Jizzle and TG, he had responded through lyrics that were confrontational and unapologetic. But on November 21, 2025, the narrative shifted irreversibly. Because as investigators pieced together what happened on North Lancaster Avenue, one fact stood above all speculation. A 20-year-old rapper was dead in the same city where his music had amplified ongoing tensions. And as the hours passed and the crime scene slowly cleared, the block returned to its normal rhythm. Cars resumed passing through. Businesses reopened the next day. But the conflict that surrounded his name did not pause. Instead, it adopted. More edits surfaced. More discontent followed. References to that night became embedded in new lyrics almost immediately. What had been an active rivalry transformed into another chapter of documented loss. But even as commentary continued online, the legal process moved forward quietly in the background. As of now, the Dallas Police Department maintained that the investigation was active. Anyone with information was encouraged to contact authorities or Crime Stoppers. No suspects were publicly identified in the immediate aftermath. No official motive was released. And that uncertainty left room for one final realization. The same environment that had shaped his music, the alliances, the disses, the territorial disputes, had not disappeared. His death did not resolve the tension. It became part of it. Because in the world Jacorin operated in, conflict rarely ends with a single incident. And as detectives continued working to determine exactly who pulled the trigger and why, the question shifted from what happened to what would happen next. In the days that followed, Jacorin Hall's family began preparing for something no parent or sibling ever plans for, a funeral for a 20-year-old whose name had been ringing through speakers just hours before. Friends gathered quietly, away from the noise of social media. There were candles, t-shirts with his face printed across the front, and long embraces that said more than words ever could. While timelines and rumors flooded the internet, his family focused on saying goodbye to a son, a cousin, a friend. But beyond the funeral, the impact stretched far wider. His death reignited conversations about Dallas drill culture, retaliation cycles, and how quickly online disrespect can spill into real-world violence. Within hours, diss tracks surfaced. Within days, debates erupted about clout, loyalty, and accountability. The same platforms that helped build his name also amplified his final chapter. And that is the lasting reality of this case. A young man whose life became intertwined with music, rivalry, and reputation ultimately became another reminder of how fragile that image can be. The streets move fast, the internet moves faster, but grief moves slow. And for the people who loved him, that silence will last far longer than any song ever could. What do you think about it? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.